Welcome to Manage Your Damn Money with Ben and Malcolm, where we trade in personal finance advice for entertaining conversations about money and millennials. Welcome world to yet another episode of Manage Your Damn Money with Ben and Malcolm, where we are back for our very first show, Malcolm, in the year of 2019. How are you, sir?
I'm good, man. It's good to be back.
Indeed.
Although I was thankful for the break.
Indeed. In the new year, just to let people know, we had a short break, a bit of time to get ourselves together. Malcolm's been going through a lot of life stuff. You're about to get married in April.
Yeah.
It's coming up. And I, of course, have been dealing with the experience of having 3 children all at once, which has been interesting. But I'm still here, and the dream of Manage Your Damn Money is still alive, sir. Are you surprised?
I'm not surprised. I actually am impressed and pleasantly impressed with the amount of folks that have inquired about what's going on via the interwebs, via Twitter.
Absolutely. The biggest piece that I experienced, actually, somebody on Twitter kind of threw low-key some shade, and they were like, I mean, I know you had kids, but where's the show at? I'm like, dog.
I appreciate that, in all honesty. The fact that, because think about it, if we stopped the show for a couple months and nobody cared.
Right, that's true.
I would be a little bit offended.
Indeed.
I don't know about you. So the fact that people are even saying, what am I supposed to listen to?
Right.
I appreciate that.
Indeed. A lot has gone on since we've been gone. But of course, any updates for us really quickly on the experience of you're doing a couple adult things coming up. You're buying a house soon, or you're already. What's the status with that?
We're under contract, but we're not in it yet.
Okay.
So I'll be excited, I guess, on move-in day.
Right.
But for now, it's just
you just got your hold on the house.
Pretty much.
That's a good thing. That's still a big step. And in terms of the wedding, man, how's that going? That's a lot of money to be spent there.
A lot of money to be spent. A lot of attention to detail is the way that I will put it. And every detail matters. I'm constantly being educated.
And you better remember that. Don't you forget it.
Yeah.
The flowers, the size of the petals. The runner thing that goes down the aisle or whatever, that matters too.
It matters to somebody. And I just,
Indeed.
I'm just along for the ride.
Indeed.
At this point, I'm the +1 to my fiance for this wedding.
That's your own wedding?
Yeah.
Well, that is true. We are happy to be back on the show. On this episode, this is actually the first time we'll be doing a show in this manner. This is part 1 of understanding economic inequality and the policies being peddled to address it. We're going to address one half of the issue on this episode, and then we'll address the other half, Malcolm, on the second half. But before we get into that topic on this episode, as we do on every show of Manage Your Damn Money, it is now time for headlines. The IRS will need at least a year to recover from the government shutdown. Watchdog tells Congress, and this was a January 2018 piece, Malcolm, on WashingtonPost.com by Jeff Stein. It said the Internal Revenue Service has told lawmakers it would return from the government shutdown, buried in millions of unanswered taxpayer letters, weeks behind schedule on training for workers, and in need of hiring thousands of new employees for this tax filing season, according to 2 House aides. The National Taxpayer Advocate, a government watchdog group that oversees the tax collector, has also told the House staffers that it's likely to take at least a year for the IRS to return to normal operations, according to the 2 House aides, who spoke on the condition of anonymity because that's what's hot these days. A reminder, Malcolm, this was the result of the recent government shutdown brought on by political fighting over funding for 45's border wall.
Oh, you don't have to remind me.
Yeah, well, most people don't.
Won't forget.
We won't forget. So, Malcolm, real quick, was there any impact on the financial sector of the government shutdown? Like, you work in, wealth management sector. Was there any impact there?
Well, it didn't really impact us from the standpoint of our clients having major issues. Mm-hmm. I think the bigger impact that I noticed, at least, was the banks that were constantly reaching out saying, if you are impacted by the government shutdown, let us know proactively so that we can help you. So if you've got a mortgage that's due, let us help you defer it until you get back to work, or a car note or whatever else you have going on. Let us help you. in a way that I don't know that I've really seen
Right.
before, maybe a year or two ago when the first few natural disasters, hurricanes and stuff started hitting. And all of a sudden I noticed again, the
Right.
banks starting to say, let us proactively help you.
Right.
Reach out, let us know if you were impacted. Before that, they were kind of like, well, you should have insurance. Or you should have saved money.
Are we seeing a more caring corporate America? Is that what you're saying?
We're seeing a corporate America that's more cognizant of their image. I think that's the way to say it.
Okay.
Because imagine if one person was to go viral on Twitter or Instagram or whatever, blasting one of the major banks
Right.
because they foreclosed on their house
Right.
because of the government shutdown.
Ah.
Wouldn't be a pretty good look.
That is true.
And at the social media juncture that we're at, where
Indeed.
people literally have the ability to galvanize and stop each other from buying a hoodie
Right.
with a monkey on it,
Right.
or stop buying that Frappuccino because guys are getting harassed hanging out at Starbucks for
Right.
the color of their skin.
Right.
Like, if social media has the capacity to bring down your empire that fast,
Right.
you now have to pay more attention and be a little more sensitive, I guess is the word, to how that comes across to the folks out there. So I would say, in short, the cynic in me is not all that impressed.
Uh-huh.
I just think that it's a function of this is where we are, and they're
Indeed.
taking heed of where we are.
Indeed. Well, the piece went on to say that the Trump administration ordered more than 30,000 employees back to work without pay to prepare for the tax filing season, which is set to begin at the time next week. But about 8,000 workers have claimed hardship exemption to not return to work, while an additional 5,700 workers could not be reached. That's hilarious. Could not be reached. The IRS has a backlog of 5 million unanswered pieces of mail from taxpayers, up 2.5 million on January 16th. IRS officials have told House aides with in-person taxpayer assistance centers closed during the shutdown, the IRS was receiving more than 700,000 pieces of mail every day, up from 200,000 pieces of mail as of January 16th, which would have been before the shutdown. So it is interesting, speaking of that, like those pileups of mail, I myself got a piece of mail from the IRS basically saying, please give us 60 more days to address this issue, which I opened it up expecting to see, like, okay, they're going to give me my final answer on this particular issue. And
So you were expecting it.
I was expecting them to say, this is the decision on the thing you asked us about.
Okay.
But
Because anytime somebody says, I got a letter from the IRS, I'm like, dun, dun, dun. Like, it's not like a happy conversation like you just introduced it.
That's what I was expecting. And when I
Okay.
opened it, it was like, hey, the shutdown really affected us such that we can't actually address your thing right now.
So look out for another one 59 days in. That
Exactly.
says we need another 60 days.
Exactly. Question for you. It's like the some would say the foolishness of this administration has landed at our front doors. Are you surprised the level at which it has? It's like crazy. It's touching real people in
Is that
real
a
ways.
real question? Or are you asking that because it's in the outline of the show, and so you have to ask it?
I think that's maybe what it is.
Because I know you already know the answer to. Heck yes, dude. This was all foretold from the very beginning.
Okay.
Right. How does the guy who filed for bankruptcy 3 or 4 times pretend that he's going to be able to manage the country's budget any better, right? So none of this is a surprise to me,
Right.
just based on the way the guy has managed his own money
Right.
along the way. So like his interview for the job was running his own company.
Right.
If he had to file for bankruptcy 3 times in managing that company, how did he get to the next stage of the
Right.
interviewing process, right? Like I have to submit financials to my company every single year to prove that I'm still on solid financial footing,
Right.
and like should be allowed to give out financial advice to the masses.
Right.
How does anybody think anything different was going to come out of it? But separately from that,
Uh-huh.
the thing that really added insult to injury to this was in 2017, the Trump administration passed the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act,
Right.
which fundamentally flipped our tax code on its head.
Right.
The IRS was already trying to wrap its arms around that
Right.
in the year that it was given in 2018
Right.
to start to be able to make sense of it, to push it out there for 2018's filing season, early 2019. I think January 28th is when the tax filing season starts.
Right.
They were trying to get ready for that change.
Just the regular issue.
Right. And they were already saying we're already short-staffed by like 10,000 people we
Right.
need here to help with this flood. So the letters were already coming in from accountants and trade organizations and everything else saying, hey, we need more clarification on this. We need more clarification on that.
Right.
We need you to rule on this.
Right.
Those things were already happening, and people were already underprepared for 2018's tax filing season.
Right.
And then you set people at home
Right.
for 35 days, critical days, right? Like,
Right.
I don't know if you watched any of the Fire Festival documentaries, but I'm thinking about the fact that, like, these guys tried to pull off the world's biggest music festival in like 60 days. And then they had to change locations like 30 days into it. So they had 30 days to find an island, talent,
Right.
housing, all that kind of. This is what that reminds me of.
That's
like, he
hilarious.
basically took 35 days off the table when you were already. It just occurred to me that Donald Trump is the Fire Festival of presidents. As I'm talking about this, it literally just, it now makes so much more sense. I think the dude's name is like Billy Madison that pulled this whole thing off. Like,
Okay.
he's the Billy Madison Fire Festival of presidents. That is.
Live realizations like you just had.
I just had an epiphany.
Indeed. It's amazing to watch. Your face just like paused and lit up. So speaking of all that, a little bit more of a serious question. As a financial professional
Sure.
you're in the space, do you feel like this government shutdown is going to have this tax season dragging on for like, years and years after the fact?
I think what's going to end up happening is you're going to get letters in the mail years from now that should have shown up months after you filed to say, hey, you made a mistake, or hey, we're just now catching something that's questionable. Can you provide us additional documentation or whatever? Right. But to be completely honest with you, I think this shutdown is going to benefit people from the IRS's perspective more than it's going to hurt.
Absolutely.
In the sense that they're so disorganized now, just trying to get filing season done.
Right.
They don't have the time or the resources to audit anybody.
Nope.
They don't have the time or the resources to come after you to say, hey, you're behind on your payments from years in the past.
Right.
They don't have the time or the resource to levy tax liens against people's property the way they normally would. Who's going to do it? Everybody's busy worried about filing deadlines and stuff. So I think, honestly, from just specifically this perspective, this actually helps more people than it hurts, in my estimation, just through the IRS. I want to be clear. I'm not talking about the whole country. Just through the lane of the IRS and the tax filing season. I think more people are going to get away with murder from this tax season
just
than
from all
would
the
have
confusion.
before. Yeah, just from all of the confusion. They've been given a lot more leeway and time to work on it.
To that point about the IRS not having anything ready, I looked online for a particular tax piece of documentation that I pull down every year to like do the taxes for the NYDM, the business part. And I found something online that said, this is a draft. Please do not take this as final. It was like a whole first page, like basically saying, this is what we think it's gonna be, but this is not the final documentation, which I thought was, again, hilarious when I saw it. Because I said, wow, this is really
There's parts of the new business tax code that still on the website say subject to change.
Wow.
And we're already into the filing season.
Right.
So it's going to be interesting. But I think if nothing else, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act combined with this IRS 35-day layoff has basically created a moat around the tax preparation field.
Right.
So anybody who was lamenting the fact that come April 15th, they don't have as much work to do, the season's over and there goes my client base. No, this work is going to drag out way further into this year than it ever has before.
Indeed.
Because there's just so much confusion.
Indeed. Well, I want to remind people you're listening and watching Manage Your Damn Money with Ben and Malcolm. I want to remind you can always catch the show as a podcast on multiple platforms, including Apple Podcast, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Google Play, and now Spotify. Of course, please leave us a review or a rating on any of those excellent platforms. That helps more people catch our show. If you have a question or subject you want us to cover, send it to us, info@manageyourdamnmoney.com. And of course, you can always follow us on that good old social media on Instagram and Twitter. My handle's @MYDM with a 1 on the end. Malcolm, how about yours?
At Malcolm on Money.
And of course, you can catch us on the good old Facebook, facebook.com/manageyourdamnmoney. This is MYDM with Ben and Malcolm. We will be right back. Welcome back to Manage Your Damn Money with Ben and Malcolm, where today's conversation at hand for this episode, understanding economic inequality and the policies being peddled to address it. And this is actually a two-part series of our show. We're going to cover part one in this episode, and we're going to cover part two in an upcoming episode. Malcolm, America and the world at large is coming to a broad and widely held conclusion. Economic inequality is becoming a problem, with the world's richest people owning literally half of all the monetary wealth in the world. Questions are beginning to be raised about whether this is right, sustainable, or even desirable. In this part one of our two-part series, we at Manage Your Damn Money will be looking first to understand economic inequality, and in our following show, we'll look at some of the solutions and policies being offered as solutions to this growing problem, Malcolm. So why don't you tell us, like, at just base, Malcolm, what are some things that you've known or heard about economic inequality as a term, as a concept?
Man, how much time do we have? I think the true biggest issues to deal with when we talk about economic inequality as it stands just in the United States,
right, is
how many people are in the position that they're in through no work of their own, but because of their ancestors. So if you think about like the Walton family who owns Walmart,
right,
how many billionaires were created just from Sam Walton when he died,
right,
distributing those assets through to his heirs.
Right.
Or if you think about like the Koch brothers, for example, who I don't know where they are on the list, but they're probably like number 3 or something on the list of like world's wealthiest billionaires. Same thing. Business transferred to the two brothers,
right,
they now run a lot of the political engine that is the United States,
right,
from their donations and their dollars.
Right.
So if you just think about people like that and the assets that transfer down to those generations, those people then are in a position to never have to work a day in their life. Some of them never will,
right,
and are blind, I think, in a lot of instances to the way the rest of the world looks, because they've been insulated from it their entire lives.
Absolutely. And economic inequality defined, income inequality refers to the extent to which income is distributed in an uneven manner among a population. In the United States, income inequality, or the gap between the rich and everyone else, has been growing markedly by every major statistical measure for more than some 30 years. As I turn into a DJ skipping, the richest 1%, Malcolm, this is an article that we pulled for this show, own half of the world's wealth, a study finds. This was a November 27 piece on theguardian.com by Rupert Neat. The article said that the globe's richest 1% own half the world's wealth, and that was according to a new report about the growing gap between the super rich and everyone else. The world's richest people have seen their share of the globe's total wealth increase by 42.5% at the height of the 2008 financial crisis to 50.1% in 2017, according to the Credit Suisse Global Wealth Report.
So hang on a second. So you went through that really fast, but I want to point that out because that's like monumental. So 2008 economic crisis came.
Absolutely.
And 10 years removed, we can say it came and went.
Yes.
Right?
Uh-huh.
In that same process, I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of people lost their house,
right,
and watched their net worth go from a positive number to a negative number.
Right.
At the same time, the people who were in position to be able to take advantage of
that moment
right, were the people who were already the most well off.
Which is counterintuitive, because you wouldn't think that people would, at least at first glance, accumulate more wealth in a time when wealth is, theoretically down.
In theory.
Right.
But anybody who's an astute investor,
right,
is looking for opportunities like that to, right, be able to exploit, right, with their access to capital, and their resources.
Indeed.
So, for example, Warren Buffett single-handedly bought preferred stock from Goldman Sachs to keep Goldman Sachs afloat, right, during the economic crisis. Warren Buffett is one person, and he was able to keep the world's, or one of the world's largest banks, right, afloat himself from his own personal piggy bank with cash that was sitting on the sidelines.
Wow.
This isn't even investments he had to sell to create the money.
Right.
He just wrote a check,
right,
and said, hey, here you go.
Give me my preferred stock.
Give me my preferred stock, and I want X amount of interest over the next 10 years, and we'll call it a day.
Wow.
But like just the fact that a person had the ability to do that, that hasn't really been seen since the days of like the early 1900s. I think it may have been even like the 1890s when J.P. Morgan himself bailed out the United States Treasury from going bankrupt. So if you just think about the fact that that's even possible for one person, and he built his wealth, from what I understand, in his own lifetime, right?
Right.
Berkshire Hathaway has gone along for the last 50 or so years
Right.
from Warren Buffett building his investment behemoth over that time. But just the fact that like people actually exist who have the cash and the capacity to be able to profit and double down essentially in moments of crisis like that, knowing that eventually that money's going to come back. They bought real estate, they bought buildings they never intended to renovate or move anybody into. They bought land that they knew they were never going to build anything on. They bought stocks in companies they didn't even care about. Like all of those things, taking advantage of the fact that the market was down as deep as it was, and saying eventually it's going to come back, and I can afford to wait.
Right, and take that moment to wait.
Right.
The article went on to say the increase in wealth among the already very rich led to the creation of 2.3 million new dollar millionaires over the past year, taking the total to 36 million. These millionaires, who account for 0.7% of the world's adult population, control, get this, 46% of the total global wealth. Malcolm, my dad had this theory that like if the people don't have enough, eventually the people go knocking on the doors of like the rich people, which was like an interesting, like at the time, like old man theory. But in this context, I'm like, I kind of see what he's talking about.
It makes sense to an extent. Like I've never seen Mark Zuckerberg on TV traveling without his own Secret Service level security.
Wow.
You maybe don't notice them because they're 20 feet behind him, but people like that don't go out in public without the kind of protection they need to not be knocked out like that.
Right.
For the most part. I mean, you may have some people that are like, I'm keeping it real and I'm out here with the people, like Richard Branson. But for the most part, people like that, you can't get that close to them anyway.
That's true. Aside from my dad's thoughts, do you have any theories or understanding of how we have come to this point in the United States of America in particular?
Stock ownership, I think, is the biggest thing. So, not even in front of me, so forgive me if our fact checkers tell me I'm wrong on this number by 1% or 2%. But the way I understand it, the top 1% of the United States, so the people who have the top 1% of the wealth in our country, actually own 85% of all the stocks on the S&P 500.
Right.
So 500 of the largest companies on all of the exchanges that we invest in, 1% of the American population owns all of those stocks. So that means that 1% of the population also owns all of those companies.
Right.
Because stock ownership is a percentage ownership of the company.
Right.
So you have 1% of the country determining what 85% of the companies are allowed to do.
Right.
They also ultimately then have all of the sway and all of the pull over Congress, the Senate, and the White House, because those people are all shaking their tin cup at fundraisers at the people who run those 500 companies, saying, hey, would you mind contributing to my campaign? Well, in doing so, they do it at the pleasure of the people who own all the stock in their company. Those are the largest shareholders who turn around and say what you can and cannot do as president of the United States or Senator so-and-so.
I feel like this is one of those conversations where a person comes out from behind the curtain and then pops us both. You're not supposed to be talking about this in public.
You need to stop watching Scandal.
Another article that we pulled for this story, a new billionaire is minted every 2 days as the poor lose wealth. This was actually from January 2019 article on CBS.com by Amy Peachy. Income inequality is creating what charity Oxfam International calls a deeply shocking trend. Billionaires are not only growing wealthier and adding to their ranks, but the poorest half of the world's population is losing wealth as the world economy is expanding. The economic climate is accruing outsized gains to billionaires whose fortunes rose by 12% last year, while the poorest half of humanity, that's 3.8 billion people, people saw their wealth decline by 11%, according to Oxfam. With the benefits of the economic expansion shifting to the world's richest people, billionaires are adding $2.5 billion in wealth each day, and every 2 days, a millionaire jumps into the ranks of the billionaire class, Malcolm. Oxfam, which has been studying the dynamics of the wealth inequality since 2011, said the latest findings suggest that a new economic approach is needed to help recenter wealth distribution. Many policymakers and economists have believed that economic growth will lift all boats, but that isn't playing out for billions of people across the globe. One reason, as you mentioned before, tax rates have dropped to recent historic lows, allowing rich and the corporations to hold on to more wealth. And then the top-heavy distribution of wealth has coincided with the drastic reduction in tax rates for the world's richest folks, Malcolm. So some quick questions for you before we go to our next music break. Noise about the trends of economic inequality have been rising and in pitch for a couple years now. Yeah. Do you see the trend changing, or will this continue to be an issue, particularly in the U.S.?
I hate to be even more of a dark cloud on this whole thing, but
dum.
The last time that we had economic inequality at this level that we're talking about right now, it was just before the Great Depression. So
1930, not 2008.
Right, that would be the Great Recession.
Right.
The Great Depression was even worse and longer in the 1930s, and that is part of what was said to cause the Great Depression and what was said to cause the length that it lasted and how long its actual lasting impact on the country. So I don't know that necessarily foreshadows that we're headed in that direction again, but what I will say is it doesn't help. Right. So you have a whole bunch of people who are saying it makes absolutely no sense to lower taxes on people who have the most money and who generate the most income at the same time. Like, it makes absolutely no sense. But then you have people on the other side of that argument who will say, well, the less that I have to pay in taxes, the more that I have to spend, and then it'll trickle down and blah, 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 blah,
which
blah.
Generally doesn't seem to make sense in my mind.
No.
If I have more money, I'll plan to keep.
As a friend of mine likes to quote his dad at me and say, you'll never get rich spending money. That is the mantra of the wealthiest people that tend to accumulate this kind of assets. So they're not going to spend the money anyway. They're looking for ways to keep from having to give it to anybody else. And so it'll just continue to be this cat and mouse game of there's the tax, there's the loophole. There's the tax, there's a loophole. So it doesn't make any sense at all on its face to say the lower the taxes are on the people who make the most money, the more there is for them to be able to dole out to everyone else.
The masses. Please, sir, may I have some more?
I've never seen Warren Buffett on the corner passing out turkeys like Nino Brown. Like, that's just never going to happen, right? So let's be realistic about this and understand that the only way you're going to get this money out of those people's hands at the time that they make it is through taxes. So,
It's an interesting thing. Question for you, though. There have been a couple of wealthy billionaire people who have addressed the issue. I saw CNBC posted something on Instagram not too long ago. There was some billionaire who said we need to address this issue, and not in like a foo-foo way, but in an actual substantive way.
That was Howard Schultz, who is simultaneously running for president
I'm not talking,
of the United States.
It wasn't Howard Schultz. It was some other guy.
Okay.
But to that point, do you feel like there is a percentage of those billionaires who would actually give away some of that in, for instance, tax money as a result of trying to fix the situation, or is that not to be hoped for?
I do. Bill Gates has signed a giving pledge to give away 99% of his overall net worth at the time he dies. So did Warren Buffett. So have a few other really large name people like that. With the argument that if my heirs can't figure out how to make a life for themselves with 1% of however many billions of dollars I'm worth, then I've done a bad job as a parent. Which I think honestly says a lot. Because think about it. 1% of $100 billion is still $1 billion, right? So if I am the beneficiary of that $1 billion, I'm Bill Gates' son, say, for example, if I can't figure out a way to outlive $1 billion, I don't deserve it in the first place, right? So I understand that logic, and I'm also very surprised that they've decided to do it that way. Because usually the only time you find people willing to turn it around like that is when they've gotten themselves into some trouble and they need to garner public support. Like the family whose name is all over all the buildings, Rockefeller. Like when they, John Rockefeller was like 75 or something, knocking on death's door and decided suddenly to start giving away money to universities for research so that people would remember him fondly. But he had already pillaged all of the other oil companies around the world and made them poor and put them out of business.
That's one way to do it.
And developed a name for himself as a terrible businessman.
Right.
But now, because I give away money to universities, people are like going to think of me fondly.
Indeed, indeed. We're going to take another quick music break, but when we return, we're going to continue to discuss understanding economic inequality and the policies being peddled to address it. Again, this is a two-part series. This is the first part of a two-part series. And of course, you can always catch past episodes of Manage Your Damn Money on Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Google Play, and Spotify. We ask that you leave us a review or rating on any of those platforms so more people can catch our show. If you have a question or a subject you want us to cover, send it to us, info@manageyourdamnmoney.com. You can always catch us on Instagram or Twitter. My handle is @MYDM1. Malcolm, how about you?
@MalcolmOnMoney.
And you can always catch us on Facebook, facebook.com/manageyourdamnmoney. This is MYDM with Ben and Malcolm. We will be right back. Welcome back to Manage Your Damn Money. Ben and Malcolm, where on this episode, we are talking about understanding economic inequality and the policies being peddled to address it. Malcolm, this is the first time we're doing a show like this where we address one half of the thing in one show and then we carry that conversation to another show.
Because it's deep, man.
It's deep and thick and you got to get into it. So another article that we pulled for this was the world's 26 richest people own as much as the poorest 50%, says Oxfam. This was also a January 2019 article on The Guardian by Larry Elliott. The growing concentration of the world's wealth has been highlighted by a report showing the 26 richest billionaires own as many assets as the 3.8 billion people who make up the poorest half of the planet's population. That sounds great, right? No, it doesn't. It said the widening gap was hindering the fight against poverty, adding that a wealth tax on the 1% would raise an estimated $418 billion a year, enough to educate every child not in school and provide health care that would prevent 3 million deaths, I guess, a year. Malcolm, we often talk about taxes on the wealthy, and they're seen as a quick fix for economic and municipal challenges like health care and education. How do moderately wealthy people, people who you might deal with as at a wealth management firm, see these kinds of taxes?
You know what? So here I'm going to take a circuitous route to answer that question.
All right, let's do the Sarah. What's her name?
I don't know. You're
Sarah
talking
Huckabee.
Oh yeah, Sarah Sanders. Sarah Huckabee Sanders. This is I'm not as bad as her. Don't put me in that boat because at least this is all truth.
Okay.
So essentially, the issue is one. will the government actually spend my money appropriately once they take it from me? That's a common theme. But more importantly, too, the conversation in America is always that you too can be as wealthy as I am if you just work a little harder. And so that dream gets sold to you when you're 6 years old, sitting in your first grade class, and the billionaire in your neighborhood comes to your neighborhood school to talk to the class because their kid is also your classmate. They come to talk to the class about all you need to do is pull yourself up by those bootstraps that I hear so much about. I don't even understand what that phrase means, to be honest. Like, how the heck do I pull myself up by a bootstrap? Anyway, so you get sold that story again and again and again, and there will be a few people like Mark Zuckerberg, for example, who created a company out of nothing in his dorm room that was the biggest, baddest, whatever. The thing that never really gets highlighted is the fact that Mark Zuckerberg's family was well off to begin with. His dad was a pretty prominent dentist in his community, and he was going to be fine just one way or another. Right? So the fact that, he already was in a position that where he was going to be fine and he could take that kind of financial risk dropping out of Harvard to go pursue this crazy idea, that whole dynamic gets left out of the conversation and left out of the equation. But in reality, that matters more than anything else. But the dream that gets sold to people that makes them pound the table and say, we don't need to pay more taxes, we need to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps, is the promise that you too, middle American, not middle physically, but middle income American, you too could become a billionaire from where you are if you just worked a little harder and pulled yourself up a little harder by your bootstraps. You'll get there too. Don't worry about the people at the bottom screaming and shouting and protesting. They're never going to get there because they're lazy. But us, you're close to us. You're like us, right? You live adjacent to our nice neighborhoods, and you also go to the same gas station as me and see me, filling up my Range Rover. And
this is a circuitous route. I'm waiting for the turn.
But this is my point. That dream gets sold to a point that you don't have to convince people that it's a good thing to pay taxes. You can never convince those people that it is because they've already been convinced that taxes are the devil. So by the time they get to the point where they're paying a significant amount in taxes, they're already conditioned to say taxes are bad, taxing me is a problem, and I'm going to vote against anybody who ever thinks about charging me taxes. I'll use myself as an example and be completely honest. I just filed my taxes this past weekend, and when I looked at how much I paid to the state of Maryland and to the federal government, I was scratching my head saying, no, we need lower taxes. This is outrageous. This doesn't make any sense. Why is so much of my money going to the federal government? So a person who called me up that day and said, hey, my candidate is running for governor or president and they're promising to lower your tax bill, they may have gotten my attention that day. Fortunately, I'm not a single issue voter, but if I was, you got my ear.
That's hilarious. I don't even remember what my question was. I hope it answered it for whoever was wondering what the answer was going to be. Oxfam said the wealth of more than 2,200 billionaires across the globe had increased $900 billion in 2018, and that's, if you're wondering, $2.5 billion a day. 12 percentage increase in wealth of the very rich contrasted with the fall of 11% in wealth of the poorest half of the world's population. As a result, the report concluded the number of billionaires owning as much of wealth as half the world's population fell from 43 in 2017 to 26 last year. In 2016, the number was 61. In the 10 years since the financial crisis, the number of billionaires has nearly doubled, which, as we said earlier in the show, is a little counterintuitive, but when you break it down and think about it, it makes more sense. Billionaires have the most assets to do things and make risky investments that will pay off a lot. I wonder, Malcolm, if we could talk just a little bit more about how the economic crisis in particular inspired the consolidation of wealth in this way.
Sure.
How did that happen, and talk a little bit more about that.
Well, I'll give you an example. Think about if you were a person who you owned your home, you have a job paying, a decent. You and your wife collectively, you made $300,000-$400,000, right? So maybe one of you is a physician, one's an attorney, or something that generally fits into that income base, or something similar. And you are in your 50s, right? So you own your home already. You've got this level of income, and you're in a profession that income's not going to stop just because the market is tumbling around you, right? And you just so happen to be pretty good with your money to the point that you've amassed, a couple $1 million in savings, right? At the time you're in your 50s, like I'm talking about. And all of a sudden the economic crisis is happening. You look at your bank account and say, we've got $1 million sitting in cash that we could do something with if we wanted to. Right. We should figure out a way to take advantage of the fact that the market's down 38% at its depth in 2008. Right. And you just so happen to have a great financial advisor. His name may or may not be Malcolm. He called you up and said, this is a great time to put some of that cash you have sitting on the sidelines to work. Right. But we're not going to buy stocks necessarily. We're going to buy property. Right. So you're going to go buy 10 houses in your neighborhood or the neighborhood next to yours, right, where foreclosure signs are going up left and right. You're going to hang on to those houses for 8 to 10 years. Right. And as soon as the market gets way too hot, you're going to unload all those properties and make 5x on that money that you put into it. Right. Then you can put your $1 million back in cash, replace it where it was, put the rest of it to use wherever, deploy it wherever you want to. Mm-hmm. They said, okay, great. We're so glad we worked with you. We're going to do that. And then 10 years removed, we just saw, I think, 6 months ago, maybe the housing market finally cooled off at its highest it's been in 10 years. Right. So those properties I'm talking about that you bought for next to nothing, right, you already sold them because you saw a 5 times return on your money for doing absolutely nothing other than being in the right place at the right time and having the cash to do something about it. Right. So I'm talking to you about the average middle American story, right? I'm not talking about a super wealthy person who's already some real estate tycoon who's been doing this forever. Right. I'm talking about people who are doing okay for the locations that they live in, right? If a person has a couple $1 million and they live in Houston, Texas, they're doing great. Right. If that person has a couple $1 million and they live in Washington, D.C., they may be crying poor. It just depends on where they are in life. So I say that to say there's so many situations where people who you would have never even thought about were able to take advantage of the situation in that way that also helped to create that dispersion. Obviously, there were some really big players in the market that were able to take advantage of it. But also, you had quite a few people in the upper middle class who became super middle class through being able to take advantage
that should be a new designation. My goal is to become super middle class. Oxfam's director and of campaigns and policy, Matthew Spencer, said the massive fall in the number of people living in extreme poverty is one of the greatest achievements of the past quarter of the century, but rising inequality is jeopardizing further progress. The way our economies are organized means wealth is increasingly and unfairly concentrated among a privileged few, while millions of people are barely subsisting. Women are dying for lack of decent maternity care, and children are being denied an education that could be their route out of poverty. No one should be condemned to an early grave or a life of illiteracy simply because they were born poor. That was a quote from the person who works for the organization Oxfam. So broad-based impacts, Malcolm, before we wrap the show, of wealth inequality, because I kind of did some additional research just to kind of look at what it does. Mm-hmm. One of the first things at the top, increasingly, society becomes controlled by, as you've kind of alluded to several times, smaller and smaller groups of wealthy people and companies. The question is, does Amazon need a seat at Congress is the next question, or that's how things are linked together. Amazon has a lot of money. Jeff Bezos has a lot of money. Does he have undue influence on how things work in the political sphere?
He already owns the state of Washington, so why not?
Indeed. Then, as we mentioned, I think in a quote above, the hand you're dealt is the hand you play with the rest of your life. When wealth is concentrated, there are fewer pathways into the next social class, into that super middle class route, because most of the pathways have been constricted off. Mm-hmm. Then also, democratic societies lose their intended effectiveness with a wealthy minority of people making a greater share of decisions. This opens the door for judicial, legislative, and administrative corruption. That's from Wikipedia. What is this? Did you hear that?
Yeah.
Did it sound familiar? I'm just playing. Anyway, another impact of wealth inequality, higher rates of health and social problems, lower rates of social goods. And interestingly enough, also from Wikipedia, life expectancy lowers, which is crazy.
Not really. If you think about how old the U.S. presidents tend to be when they die. 90. How old was George Bush last year when he 90-something? I don't remember. You have access to the best health care you can possibly get for all of the years that matter health-wise,
Right.
right? So from 50 plus or 60 plus, you've got the best healthcare and the money to pay for it.
Right.
You're gonna live longer just because you go take care of preventative things and you have the money to buy the medicine you need to keep you living longer.
Right.
For poorer people, it becomes a question of, do I pay to keep my heat on at the dead of winter when it's 10 degrees, or do I pay for my prescription?
Right.
When that equation stops adding up, that person dies a lot younger than the person that's got access to health care and the money to pay for it.
That's true. That's true. And then finally, the economic stratification of society into elites and the masses has played a central role in the collapse of other advanced civilizations, namely the Roman, Han, and Gupta empires, and that's also from Wikipedia. So Malcolm, we have a question that we have to answer here, not on this show, but on the next one.
Yep.
How do we solve economic inequality? You have to stay tuned and listen to the next show. Of course, you
Do we
know,
have a to be continued graphic?
I
to
think
throw on the-
we need like a ...
Yeah.
or something. But I always want to remind you, you can catch past episodes of Manage Your Damn Money on Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Google Play, and Spotify. And of course, please leave us a review on any of those platforms. That helps more people catch our show. Send us questions if you have them. info@manageyourdamnmoney.com. You can always catch us on our lately not very active social media accounts at MYDM1. Malcolm, what's yours?
At Malcolm on Money.
And of course, you can catch us on Facebook, facebook.com/manageyourdamnmoney. Of course, thanks to our friends here at Montgomery Community Media for yet another amazing show. And the first one back in 2019, Malcolm.
Feels good.
We did it.
It feels good to be back.
We back. All right, the triplets didn't derail Manage Your Damn Money. Until next time, be good with your money.
Peace.
Peace.